Hello everyone, welcome to Cabin Fever Crochet with me, Helene, and today I'm so thrilled to bring you my very first shawl creation, my shawl design and written pattern. I have been writing patterns, and so I needed to spend a little extra time to really make it like public ready, and I'm so pleased with how it turned out, how it lays on the body, the shape of it. You can make this in a variety of weights and types of yarn, and you can just take a very basic type of yarn, and because the pattern creates its own texture and it has a gentle curve to go around the body, and you can make this with just the fringe only, with the border only, or both the fringe and the border. And that way you have several ways to make and wear it. And when you add the border onto it, it does create a little bit more of a curve at the bottom, and it softens the angles of the triangular shape. And also, in how I designed this, I wanted to have more width going around the back of your body. You can make it as wide or as long as you like it. And as far as yarns go, I suggest not going above, say, number 5, a light, bulky, or a chunky type of yarn. This I made in the Michaels, their in-house loops and threads brand, the Barcelona yarn. It's 100% acrylic. And it's the main color here in the lighter is a discontinued color called Sky, and I only had 2. So I had a little bit of the James C. Brett marble chunky yarn that I got at a local yarn shop. It's very similar, but it's a little thicker, so I just went down 1 hook size when I used the thicker James C. Brett yarn, and then went back up to my normal hook size. These are 7-ounce, 300 meters, it's 200 grams, 328 yards each, so I used about 3 total. But this could, if you don't necessarily want to oversize, it could easily fit up to 1X or more, depending on your height, your body shape, and so forth. And we're all built a little bit differently. And the measurements on this one is 70 inches wide by about 32 inches in height from top to bottom. You saw where that hit me. And the mandala, this is Lion brand mandala yarn. The mandala ombre, excuse me, not the original, but the ombre. It's a lighter number 4 weight and 5.3 ounces. It took almost 3, but I did do a little bit of color controlling on the fringe at the bottom to get the good even tonal colors going across. And there are a little bit light to dark, but they're all just kind of mixed in when I cut the strands. And if you haven't done a lot of fringe, I also have a tutorial on just how I cut, measure, and attach fringe. That link will be below also. So this could fit up to extra large 1X and down to a medium. If you're an extra small, probably 2 cakes would be enough for you. And same on this. And I don't know, possibly on this. I've just used 1 so far in the pink. This is DK 328 yards, 300 meters in your standard 100 grams, 3.5 ounce skein. And the thing is, it's when you start the beginning, your yarn goes a lot farther, but the wider, the more it grows, the less rows that you get out of it. So it is a 2-row repeat after a couple of setup rows, and then the rest is just super easy. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. Besides just your regular tools, your hook, scissors, yarn needle to sew in your ends, you will need 1 to 2 stitch markers, 1 for sure on the center point, and most especially if you're going to be working the border, that's very important. And then if you are newer to crochet, have a little harder time defining your beginning and end stitches, then that's where the second marker will come in handy. All right, so to begin, Make a slip knot however you like to do that. Leave enough tail to sew in your ends. And we're going to work a chain and slip stitch to the beginning chain to form a ring. And if you're tempted to work a magic circle, which I usually prefer, I don't recommend it for this project because the shawl with the beginning stitches going across the back of your neck by working the chain, it's going to give you more of a fuller stitch at the top, less of that string-like effect, and it's going to help give you a more even edge also from the very beginning. And for all yarn up to like through the worsted number 4, you can chain up 4. If you are working in a chunkier weight or number 5 bulky, such as the one shawl that I did, then try chaining up 5 stitches. Just gives you a little more space to fit everything in there. Okay, so go ahead and chain 4 and a slip stitch to the beginning stitch, and I like going through this top V here and the back bump. All right, and this part is a little fiddly. Open up the ring and making sure not to split the stitches, and we're going to work this entire sequence for row 1 of our setup row all into the center ring. And you have the choice to either work a chain 3 here and throughout at the beginning of each row, which will count as your first double crochet. However, I'm going to work an alternate double crochet, and that is what I recommend, again, to give you a nice fuller stitch going all the way across the top. Alright, so with the alternate double crochet, don't chain at all, just go ahead and insert your hook and work a single crochet. And then on this left side, the leg of your stitch, into the outside loop that's facing you, just one of them, insert your hook, yarn over, and then work another single crochet. And that is in place of and represents your first double crochet. And then now everyone go ahead and place another double crochet into the ring. Chain 1. And we're going to work a cluster stitch. I'm going to go slowly for the first 2. So yarn over, insert your hook into the ring, yarn over and draw up a loop, and every time you draw up a loop on the cluster, make sure you pull it up nice and tall to the height of a double crochet, and it helps to keep these stitches flowing and to draw that up nice and tall if you have a pool of yarn next to you to keep that free flowing. Alright, so you have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and pull through 2. Now you have 2. So that is the first part of our 3 double crochet cluster, and repeat this 2 more times. Yarn over, insert your hook back into the ring or the designated stitch in the pattern, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Now you have 3 loops on your hook. One more time, yarn over, pull up a loop, nice and tall, yarn over, pull through 2. 4 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1. And that's the first part of our center point. And now we're going to work 1 more cluster and a chain 1 to complete the second half. Alright, so yarn over, insert your hook into the ring, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2. And now the second time, yarn over, pull through 2. And the third time, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, 4 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1 to close that, and now grab a stitch marker and place that into the center. So this is your center point of your work, and into that chain 1 space. and you can move the stitch marker up within after each row as you carry on. And then now the last 2 stitches, you're just going to work 2 double crochets, and this completes row 1 of our 3-row setup. Okay, and rows 2 and 3 are very similar to what we're going to be doing here. Okay, so now either chain 3 and turn, or just turn and work an alternate double crochet into the first double crochet, first stitch from your previous row. Okay, there's the first double, or the single, excuse me. Okay, and the second part, that's my first double crochet. Now everyone work a double crochet into the beginning first stitch, and this is what you're going to do at the beginning of every row. So now you have 2 double crochets, and then now we're going to place a double crochet into your second stitch. Okay, there's either your chain 3 or your alternate, your full double crochet, so place a double crochet into that second full double crochet, and now chain 1, and in the chain 1 space between the second double crochet and the first cluster, we're going to work a cluster stitch. All right, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. That's the first part. Now twice more. Okay, and one more time, and now pull through all 4, chain 1. Here we are to our center point, and now we're going to work an increase into this space, chain 1 space between the 2 clusters. We're going to start by working a cluster. Chain 1, and now we are going to work a V-stitch, and you see I scooched those over a little bit. You can do that if you need to. And this V-stitch is a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, and now this is your new center point. After that, we're going to do a chain 1, and then you can place your stitch marker back into that center point. And then now into the same center space, we're going to work 1 more cluster. Okay. Chain 1, skip the cluster, and into the next chain 1 space, another cluster. Once you get your rhythm, you can just really go humming along here on this. Okay, so now you have your 2 double crochets, or alternate equivalent. So we're going to work 1 double crochet in the first, right, and 2 double crochets in the last, which is either the top of your alternate or the top of your chain 3. That's 1 and 2. All right, we've completed row 2 of our setup row. All right, again, turn. I'm going to work my alternate to double crochet, and another double crochet into that very same first stitch, and then see we have 3 double crochets at the beginning. We're going to chain 1, and we are going to work a cluster into that second, the middle double crochet. Okay, and this is we're doing an increase, excuse me. Okay, chain 1, we're going to skip the third, that last double crochet, and in the chain one space in between the skip double crochet and the first cluster, we're going to work a cluster. Okay. I guess you're going to hear Tasha whining again for attention. Okay, and then you continue in every chain one space. When you get up to just before the center point, work another cluster. Chain one, and then here you have your cluster, and remember in between on this previous row we worked the V-stitch, and there is the chain one space in between this next cluster, okay, and that first double crochet. So work a cluster into that chain one space. Chain one, take out your stitch marker. All right, and then in the center point in the middle of that, the chain one space of the V-stitch, we are going to repeat what we did in our first row by placing two clusters with the chain one in between. Okay, so there's the first cluster, chain one, cluster, chain one, and then again we mirror what we did on this side now up the other side. So in the chain one space between the second double crochet of the V-stitch and the next cluster, place a cluster, alright, and then go ahead and work a cluster in the next chain one space, okay, and then when you get up to the top, okay, work a cluster in the next chain one space, chain one, and then work a cluster in the next chain one space. And so your rows are going to alternate between having 2 double crochets at the end and 3. So when you are on the row where you have your 3 double crochets, because you have 2 together at the beginning, right? And so the second and third can kind of separate a little bit. Don't mistakenly think that's your chain one space. All right, make sure you're going in between your last cluster and your next stitch. Okay, chain one. You're always going to chain one after your cluster stitches, and then we're going to skip this first double crochet coming up to the top, work a cluster into the second, the middle double crochet. So we are mirroring what we did on the other side, so it's everything's now in the other direction. All right, chain one, and then either in the top of your chain 3 or the top of your alternate double crochet, place 2 double crochets. You're always going to have 2 double crochets at the beginning and at the end. Alright, so now we have completed row 3 of our setup row, and all we're going to do is repeat rows 2 and 3, 2 and 3. Wrong side, right side, wrong side, right side. I'm going to go over those 2 rows with you one more time, and then depending on how you're going to end, whether you want just the fringe or just the border, or the fringe and the border, that's going to vary on which row you end with and how you're going to end. As even with just the fringe, I changed that up ever so slightly to give you a little more of a curve at the bottom and soften those lines. We are going to work on the wrong side, so turn your work and work that alternate double crochet and another crochet into the same stitch. Alright, now we're going to place 1 double crochet in to the next, chain 1, work a cluster, chain 1. Alright, and then you're going to cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 into every chain 1 space. Now here's the center point. I did not mark that, I apologize. And if you did not mark yours, then that's easy to see. Just go back to your V-stitch from the row before, and then you will see your 2 clusters in the center, so pop a stitch marker in between. So you go ahead and you work your cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space up to the center point. I will meet you right there. Alright. Okay, here I am to the center point already. Take out my stitch marker for a minute, and now we are going to work an increase with our V-stitch. So again, in between those 2 center clusters in the chain 1 space, start by working 1 cluster, chain 1, now work your V-stitch, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, or go ahead, do your chain 1, and then you can put the stitch marker back in between those 2 double crochets in the chain 1 space. And I went ahead and worked that chain 1 because it's just easier to hang on to this stitch if I work 1 stitch after. Alright, and then now again back into this center chain 1 space, work your second cluster, okay, chain 1, and then go ahead and work a cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space all the way up to your last 2 double crochet, including in between the 2 double crochets in the last cluster. Alright, so I will meet you up at the top. Okay, I have completed my last cluster at the top, and then now we're going to place 1 double crochet into the double crochet and 2 into the last. Alright, and this completes row 2 of our 2-row repeat. And now we're going to work row 3, which is the right side of the work. Alright, so turn, and as always, work your alternate double crochet into the first and another double crochet into that same beginning stitch. And this is where we're working an increase here, as we chain 1, and then we put our cluster into the center, that second of the 3 double crochets. Okay. Chain 1, skip the last double crochet of the 3, work another cluster into the chain 1 space, between your last, that skip double crochet, and your first cluster. Okay. Chain 1. And then, as always, you are going to work cluster chain 1 in every chain 1 space all along this first side until you get up to your V-stitch. So go ahead and remember to work that cluster in between your last cluster on this side and the first double crochet of the V-stitch, okay, into that chain 1 space. All right, so I will meet you at this point up to this last cluster. All right, I'm back almost to the center point of row 3 of our pattern, and I'm going to place my last cluster on this side in the chain 1 space by that first double crochet. Okay, remember, always do your chain 1, and then now into the center of your V-stitch we will work a cluster, chain 1, and another cluster. Chain 1, and then place your stitch marker in between the 2 clusters in that chain 1 space there. Okay, and then now we're working and mirroring up the other side. So remember that chain 1 space in between your second double crochet of the V and your first cluster going up this next side. Don't accidentally miss that, because that will throw off your balance, your stitch count, and how the whole piece works up, and you will actually be reducing, doing a decrease rather than an increase. Okay, and then now you just simply work your cluster chain 1 in each chain 1 space all the way up to the top, and in between the last cluster and the first of those 3 double crochets at this end. So always make sure, remember I gave you that little tip at the beginning, because those 2 double crochets at the end kind of separate. Don't accidentally think that that's your chain 1 space. Okay, so you work in between here. All right, so I will see you up at the top. All right, here I am back at the top of row 3 of our 2-row repeat with the cluster in between the last cluster and my set of 3 double crochets. And on this row 3, because we have 3 double crochets, this is where we put a cluster into the center. So I already did the chain 1. We're going to now skip the first double crochet, work a cluster into the middle of the 3, the second double crochet. Okay, chain 1, and then now work your 2 double crochet in the top of your alternate double crochet or the top of your chain 3. Just repeat rows 2, 3, 2, 3 to your desired length or width. Alright, now to finish, to end your work, I'm going to go through each of the different options with you. If you want to just simply end with adding fringe, you will end on row 3, the right side of the work, with the exception of placing only 1 cluster chain 1 in the center point in the V-stitch of your previous row. So you're just going to eliminate the second cluster in the chain 1. That's it. Just going to have 1. Okay, here, take that out and show that to you. All right, okay, and your work will look like this, with the one cluster in the center, chain one, and then you just carry on up to the top with that row as usual, with your next cluster in between this second double crochet and the first cluster on that side in that chain one space. So you just continue on up to the top just like we did, and you finish as you have been doing or will be doing on row 3. All right, and you can see just from this little bit here how this puts a little curve along the bottom edge. Okay, and then what you do is, for your fringe, cut the number of strands that you would like and to the desired length, and attach them into every chain one space all the way around on both sides and on both ends in between the first and the second double crochet. All right, so at the ends between your first and second double crochet, so that way you have that nice finishing edge with the fringe coming off, and then in each chain one space all the way around. That's what I did. And remember, when you're cutting fringe, to double the length that you cut to end up with the finished length that you want. And if you haven't worked fringe too much, I'm going to put the link below to my video on how I attach, measure, and cut fringe. Now, if you are going to work the optional border, then you are going to end on row 2, the wrong side, with the V-stitch. Okay, and here we are. This is the wrong side of the work with the V-stitch, our increase row, and I'm going to work those 3 border rows with you now, and then I'll show you where you can easily place fringe in it if you want to do both. Just remember, as mentioned in the beginning of the video, hopefully you can see this okay, that if you do put fringe on the border, it does change the look of the border a little bit, but I think it still gives yet a different and a nice look, where you have a little more separation and interest between the body of the work and the border itself. So you can get the best of both in a way. Now for the border, you are going to chain 1 and turn, place 2 single crochets into the first stitch, that first double crochet, and then 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 double crochets. All right, and if you need a little help keeping track of that first single crochet, you can go ahead and pop a stitch marker in there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and now you're just going to place 1 single crochet in every chain 1 space, and in the top of every cluster. All right, chain 1 space, skip over to the top of the cluster. It's that elongated stitch across the top. All right, chain 1 space, single crochet, and into the top of the cluster. That's it. Single crochet in the chain 1 space, single crochet in the top of the cluster. There's the top of that last cluster. All right, and when you get down to the center point where your V-stitch is, and this is where it becomes very important, grab your stitch marker and make sure you keep track of that center point, because you will need it on the next row for sure. All right, so here I am. There's the V-stitch. There's the chain 1 space between the last cluster and the first double crochet, so make sure you do a single crochet in that chain 1 space and in your double crochet, all right, and then into the V-stitch, the chain 1 space there, and then take that stitch marker out now and go ahead, and I know I said before it's easier to place your next stitch before you put the stitch marker in, but just to make sure you don't forget or lose track, put a stitch marker into that single crochet that you just placed into the center V-stitch. All right, now again working up the side, single crochet into your second double crochet of the V-stitch, single crochet into the chain 1 space between your second double and your first cluster going up your other side. And then now we're just repeating to single crochet in the top of the cluster, single crochet in the chain 1 space, single in the top of the cluster, in the chain 1 space. Make sure don't miss that chain 1 space. Really, I suggest, even if you're fast crocheter, take your time on this part because the stitch count is really important when you're doing the border. Okay, so here we are, that last chain 1 space before my 3 double crochets at the top. So place 1 single crochet in the first, 1 in that middle, that second, and 2 in the last, which is the top of your alternate double crochet or your chain 3. All right, so that's row 1. Okay, for row 2 of our border, if you have been chaining 3 for your first double crochet, then to be consistent for your first stitch you're going to chain 4 this time, and that counts as your first double crochet plus a chain 1. Or turn the work and work 1 alternate double crochet into the first single crochet, okay, and then place your chain 1. And then everyone is going to skip the next single crochet, and you're going to work 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 single crochets. All right, and then your repeat sequence is going to be chain 1, skip the next single crochet, and work 1 double crochet into each of the next 2. Okay. Chain 1, skip the next, double crochet into each of the next 2. Chain 1, skip 1, double crochet in the next, and 1 in the next. And then stop when you come up to your last cluster, just before you come up to your V-stitch of the center point. All right, you have your stitch marker that we placed in the single crochet, the chain 1 space of the center, and the stitch just before the stitch marker is where we're going to work into. So you're going to chain 1, skip the next single crochet, and we're going to work 2 double crochets into the single crochet just before the center, which should line up with the double crochet of your V-stitch from the previous row. Okay, put 2 double crochets into that stitch. Chain 1, skip the stitch, the single crochet where your stitch marker is of your center point of the V-stitch, so you're going to skip over that and then work 2 double crochets into the next, which again lines up with your second double crochet of that V-stitch. Then you go right back into sequence, chain 1, skip the next, 1 double crochet into each of the next 2. Chain 1, skip 1, double crochet into the next, double crochet into the next. And you stop when you get to your last 2 single crochets. All right, you chain 1, skip 1, that's right, double crochet in the last. Okay, you can take the stitch marker out now. Moving on to row 3, our final row of the border. So every one this time is going to chain 2 and turn, and that counts as a single crochet and a chain 1, and into the first chain 1 space, and every following chain 1 space in between your set of 2 double crochets, we are going to work all into the space, 2 double crochets, 1 triple crochet or treble, however you call that, right, and a chain 1. We're going to skip the first double crochet and slip stitch into the second. All right, and then you jump right into the next chain 1 space and repeat that all over again. 2 double crochets, 1 triple crochet, chain 1, skip the first double crochet and slip stitch into the next. That's all you repeat, and you are going to do this all the way around, including that center point. And you can go ahead, take that stitch marker out as well, and this is what helps round out that triangular shape. It softens those harder lines and adds more body width to the work. Okay, so I'll do this a couple more times, and then I'll just meet you back real quick around the center and work that with you, and then I will show you how to finish this side, which is going to be just ever slightly so different than the beginning, but just to match that up. Okay, all right, again, we had just finished slip stitching into that second double crochet, and then you go right in to the very next chain 1 space, work 2 double crochets, 1 triple crochet, and chain 1, skip the first double crochet, slip stitch into the next, double, double, triple, chain 1, skip the first double, slip into the next. Alright, so just carry on with your sequence all the way to the top, and including the last chain 1 space after your last set of 2 double crochets. So the sequence in every chain 1 space, including this last. I will meet you here and show you how we connect, which is very simple. Okay, here I am back to the other side of our final row 3 of our border, and I'm going to work the last sequence with you. All right, so you double crochet, 1 triple, and chain 1, and then either into the top of your chain 3 or the top of your alternate double crochet, you are just going to place 1 single crochet. Before I do that, I emphasize the top of your chain 3 because remember, your chain, the 4th chain represents a chain space, and the top of your chain 3 is the top of your double crochet. So make sure you count them and don't accidentally work into your chain 1 space, as that is going to just offset, shrink your work on this side down a little bit. And you can scoot the sequence over just a little if you need to. You just work a single crochet here, and that's it. You can chain 1 to lock that in, cut your yarn, fasten off, sew in all your ends. I think that just, it looks really nice. It's not too ruffly. That's a nice little edging and separation from the body of your work. Just gives a little extra something special. And if you want to have both and add fringe to this border as well, then you would put your strands of fringe into the chain 1 space. Here we go at the beginning. Remember, so we did the chain 2. 1 represented the single crochet that we ended with, and then 1 is, of course, and that's the standalone, the chain 1. So you will insert your strands of fringe in the beginning chain 1 space and at the end, so you have a nice fringe coming off the edge of each one, and then in that chain 1 space that we did after our triple crochet in the sequence. So we have our each sequence, the 2 doubles, the triple, and the chain 1. So you can just place your fringe in each chain 1 space all the way around. Alright, well there is my first shawl that I have designed. I hope you will love it and enjoy wearing it. Please leave your comments and your feedback and let me know what you think. And until next time, take good care. Bye for now.